Climate change experts and other stakeholders are descending on New York from Monday to kick off Climate Week NYC 2020 that will take place from Monday to Sunday. Touted as the year's largest climate summit, the week will focus on achieving carbon emission-free future and rebuilding in the aftermath of COVID-19. Well, businesses, governments, academic institutions, arts organizations, individuals and non-profit organizations are invited to participate in the week-long events program, including panel discussions, exhibitions, seminars, and even more. And run in coordination with the United Nations and the city of New York, the Climate Week NYC continues to grow as the time and place for the world to showcase amazing climate action and discuss how to do more. But to understand more about this event, we have asked climate campaigner Happy Khambule, who is Greenpeace Africa political advisor, to join us for more. He is on Zoom. Mr. Khambule, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Globe.
Good evening to you and good evening to all the listeners.
This is, clearly, the largest climate summit in the world. Take us through what we should be expecting from this summit.
Well, we should be expecting a number of outcomes from this summit. Particularly, we need to see that there is continued momentum in addressing climate change from the international community, particularly understanding that this year's COP negotiations which would have given us something much more political and much more policy orientated in response to climate change has been suspended to next year due to COVID-19. So in the midst of all the discussions, there's a need for this particular summit to come out with something which is quite strong and that gives a signal that when people are building around or rebuilding their economies, they're going to be building back better and they will be considering climate change in their agenda.
Do you think the discussion will be shifting to how to continue the narrative and how to continue? Because you remember that as a result of COVID-19, the world was literally put on a reset, and there's been a major and significant reduction in carbon emissions. Do you think that the discussion will be shifted towards how to take the trajectory of a reduction in carbon emissions?
Well, I think the thing we need to remember is that that COVID-19 and the global lockdowns that happened in different countries just put a pause on current emissions at that point in time. But those emissions have recovered since different economies have been trying to get back to 2019 levels of output as well as productivity. So those emissions have come back and they've gotten to a point where we're actually still going to see an increase of emissions. So it was only a momentary pause due to the fact that there was a stifling of economic activity. But what we should be talking about is that we now see that it is possible to still continue to have a world without having emissions, and how can we move ourselves away from a fossil fuel based economy, global economy, to one that is powered by renewables and that is powered by different innovation in the ways that we work and in the ways that we produce things. And this particular summit actually has to come out with a signal, as I said in the beginning, because we're not going to have the normal other talks that will enable climate action to not only be premised forward, but also to be built upon with the momentum that it needs.
You'll recall that environmental change moderation activities are intended to sort of lessen the nursery discharges and increment of the measures of ozone-harming substances expelled from the climate by nursery sinks, if I may to call it that. Now, the seas, the plants and the soils are carbon dioxide sinks since they assimilate more carbon than they can actually emit. So in terms of the global climate change mitigation, what are we looking at? Will the discussion also shift?
I think the discussion will shift certain areas, but to be honest, it's really about where the investment is going and where the political will is within normal countries or within national geographies. Other than that, it will remain to be a talk shop, but at this point in time because people are building back. Countries are trying to recover from COVID-19. What will happen is that the signal will then have to become stronger, and these countries, including South Africa, will have to start building outside of what we've normally gotten used to. And in terms of the biodiversity and the different things that we also have other environmental issues that are jeopardizing those areas. When we look at the oceans, that they are also actually heating, and the glaciers are actually melting because of the average temperature of oceans is actually quite high. And we're looking at the fact that we've got continued deforestation. So even within the sinks that we may have and the biodiversity benefits that we may share or get as a result of all the other ecosystems, those are also being attacked. So even the ability to sink the necessary carbon is not actually at the potential that it could be because they're also being attacked. So it's a broader conversation about the ecosystems that also support us in achieving our mitigation outcomes.
And how should governments strike a balance between protecting the environment and protecting our planet, and of course, juxtaposing that with keeping the economic activities going, the very same economic activities that essentially harm the environment?
Well, that's the thing, is that for quite some time we haven't had any other alternatives, but now we're at a point where the alternatives are there. And we've also seen that there is actually a behavioral shift that is occurring even with people, even with just sectors of economies. So there are alternatives, there are substitutes, there are other ways of doing these things. And to look at it essentially to protect the ecosystems that support us and that also support our ability to be productive and to generate the necessary growth is actually good for the economy. And actually, if you are actually working on the economy, you should be working on the issues that will enable you to have a sustainable line of production or a sustainable version of how you can achieve a higher LSM or living standard measure in this case. But at the end of the day, we can't be looking at them as just opposed or as contradictions. They're actually one and the same thing. We cannot have agricultural produce if we've got droughts and we've got soil erosion. So we need to safeguard those particular means of production.
You speak of alternatives. What are they?
So sorry, I didn't get that question.
You speak of alternatives or substitutes, to protect the environment. What are these substitutes?
Yes. No, thank you for the question. I mean, like for example, when we're talking about the types of energy use that we're using, or the types of technology that we're using to generate electricity, we are now starting to see that certain sectors do not necessarily need the amount of electricity that's been generated by inflexible types of power plants. So certain sectors within our energy landscape can be totally 100% renewable. In fact, in other areas, you're talking about an actual economy-wide type of energy sector that can be powered by renewable energy. And in places where it isn't, the transition would need to be facilitated. But just as much as we're talking about the renewables, we can also be talking about the role of electrification and mobility. It's not only that we'll be using oil, it's not only that we'll be using gas, but we can talk about the direct use of electricity to ensure mobility, whether it's freight, whether it's rail, even if it's just normal passenger mobility. And we can even talk about the different types of techniques that can be used by the agricultural sector, which does not only look at monolithic types of agriculture, it looks at other versions of sustainable measures. So there are alternatives that are there, that are visible, that are being pioneered in different areas. It's just being able to utilize them and then put them within the spaces where the decisions are being made. Because where we are going is that if we continue in the same shape as we did to get here, we're going to come back to the situation again, and we will be having the same problems, even at a larger magnitude. So these kinds of moments where we can make better decisions is the moments where we should be taking those decisions. And the Climate Summit approach gives us that possibility.
And perhaps one significant, obstacle is the United States government continued attack, continued efforts to undermine climate and conservation activities. Remember that they did make an announcement that they will withdraw from the Paris Agreement. So it is a setback. It certainly is a setback. And just considering the influence that the United States, wills all over the world. So how then do we counter from this particular setback?
I think the international community has had enough time to be able to think about how to not necessarily counter, but to have a international regime that doesn't include the United States. It's a better international response if the United States is there, but it is not impossible in order for different countries to step up into leadership positions and actually start to spearhead the necessary reductions that we need in order to get us to 1.5 degrees as an average temperature increase. So I think even before the Paris Agreement, the United States had already stepped out of the Kyoto Protocol. So it's not anything new. I think the international community had taken the lessons learned from that whole approach and had started to build around it. But to be honest, it's not only about the US. It's not just about them. It's also about the other countries around the globe, even in Africa. You can look at South Africa, you can look at China, you can look at India, you can look at the United Kingdom, or even Germany. There are different countries that need to step up in order to get us to a point where the actual worst effects of climate change are not being felt. But even within the United States, different parties and different actors and organizations have started to say, like, even if the country's not doing anything, we will be putting forward our steps in order to make sure that there is a bottom-up realization of the Paris Agreement.
Well, governments certainly can play a role in protecting our environment, but then how do citizens come to the party? How can they play their role in ensuring that we protect our planet?
I think now, more than any other time, we've got the substitutes. So when we're exercising our economic power or our ability to buy things, we should be taking the decision to be informed about what we are buying, but also we need to start pushing the people that will make the decisions, particularly the manufacturers, to start giving us things that are much better, because they're always there, the things that are better, and to even exercise our rights politically to say that the political parties, as well as the principles that represent those parties, start to begin to address climate change, because it doesn't only affect just about the average temperature, right? It also affects the types of storms that we're getting, so the types of floods that we're getting and the types of damages to our infrastructure is as a result of us not acting on something that is quite key, because not only do we reduce the emissions, but we're also building the ability to withstand the likely impacts that are coming. And in order for us to get to the point where the economy and the general infrastructure is going to account for climate change, the decisions need to be made at the right time. And as I said, that would come as a result of the political principles, including the champions of industry making the right decisions, and also hearing from us as well to say that we actually want better things. We don't want to just accept the thing that we've been given when we know that it is not good.
And this should certainly be an ongoing conversation and not only confined to, symposiums or even summits. Happy, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, sir.
That was Happy Khambule, the Greenpeace Africa's political advisor, joining us via Skype.